First, Mr. President, let me do some procedural things, and then I'll get into the subject.
You're in a quorum call.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed no. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to.
To proceed to calendar number 3, SJ Res 4.
The clerk will report the motion.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 3, SJ Res 4, joint resolution removing the deadline for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment.
I move to I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the motion to proceed to calendar number 3, SJ Res 4, a joint resolution removing the deadline for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar 22.
The question is on the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed no. The ayes appear to have it and do have it. And the motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, the judiciary, Anthony Johnstone of Montana to be United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Executive Calendar number 22, Anthony Johnstone of Montana to be United States Circuit Judge for the Ninth Circuit, signed by 17 senators, as follows.
I ask consent the reading of the names be waived.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the mandatory quorum calls for the cloture motions filed today, April 25th, be waived.
Without objection.
Now, Mr. President, for months, the American people have demanded House Republicans stop their hostage-taking and show us a plan to avoid default. Last week, House Republicans failed in their assignment yet again. Speaker McCarthy rolled out a wish list straight out of the Freedom Caucus playbook. It might as well be called the Default on America Act, because that's exactly what it is. DOA. Instead of doing what both sides have done many times before, avoiding default without preconditions, Speaker McCarthy and House Republicans want to force working Americans to accept either a punch to the gut or a blow to the head. Either the U.S. defaults on national debt for the first time in American history, or MAGA Republicans get their way and America defaults on everything else, on our future and our security, on our promise to care for veterans and law enforcement and the American middle class. Either way, Republicans are promising real pain for American families when they bring their Default on America Act to the House floor this week. According to one study by Moody's Analytics, the DOA could send us into a damaging recession. So let me say one more time, what Republicans released last week was not so much a plan as it was a threat to default on America. Either we default on the national debt, or we default on everything else through extreme cuts that will harm millions of people, that is so unpopular with the American public that the Republican House has had to hide it. For all of the GOP's lip service about public safety, the House DOA Act defaults on America's law enforcement and first responders. Nearly 30,000 law enforcement jobs across the country would be cut under the Republicans' DOA Act. Over $8 billion in funding for the DOJ would be eliminated. Donald Trump called for Republicans to defund law enforcement, and now it looks like House Republicans are following through. But that's just the start. The House Default on America Act would also spell disaster for American families and American health care. Parents who struggle affording child care would see over 100,000 child care slots eliminated under the GOP proposal, preventing moms and dads from getting a job or finishing their education since they can't afford to pick up their kids in daycare. Over 21 million Americans would be at risk of losing their health care coverage. 21 million Americans losing health coverage, while hospitals would see billions in funding disappear. Hospitals, patient groups, doctors, you name it, they're all coming out in droves to oppose this measure. We just endured a global pandemic that claimed the lives of over 1 million Americans, and House Republicans want to cut funding for health care and hospitals? Utterly revolting. But the damage isn't just limited to American families. The Republican DOA Act would cripple America's ability to stay ahead of the Chinese Communist Party. After all the work we did last year on chips and science, the Republican bill would slash billions from cutting-edge research and prevent us from fully implementing chips and science. The damage would be measured in countless jobs lost, billions squandered of private investment. That's the last thing we can afford as President Xi and the CCP work to outcompete America on the world stage, squandering all that great private investment that is now coming to America. And let's not forget, should this Republican DOA bill go into effect, taxes will go up for small businesses who no longer benefit from the green energy tax credits Democrats passed last year. Many of these green tax credits support job creation in Republican districts, jobs that Republicans are happy to take credit for while working behind the scenes to destroy them. It is the dictionary definition of hypocrisy. Finally, the House Default on America Act would break America's promise to our veterans, gutting funding for new VA facilities, funding for housing and food security and addiction treatment, and even endangering 81,000 jobs across the Veterans Administration. How could House Republicans possibly think it's okay to cut funding for our veterans in exchange for lifting the debt ceiling? What kind of message does that send to our military families, our service members? If MAGA Republicans want to sell their cuts to the American people, they should not do so in the middle of discussions to avoid default. That discussion properly belongs in conversations about the budget, not here. And we'll be happy to discuss those cuts with them, oppose them as we might, in the budget, not as a prelude to default. In the meantime, I urge Speaker McCarthy to stop wasting any more time on this DOA, dead on arrival bill. Time is running out for Congress to work together to avoid catastrophe. Now, Senate business and the ERA. Mr. President, the Senate is set to have a very busy week on the floor. Later this afternoon, we'll begin with a cloture vote on the nomination of Joshua Jacobs to serve as VA Undersecretary for Benefits. Mr. Jacobs comes before the Senate at a critical moment for the VA, as he will be the one responsible for overseeing the implementation of PACT Act benefits. To date, the VA has already completed 191,000 PACT claims, 80% of which have been granted, I'm proud to say. As senior advisor, Mr. Jacobs has already done great work at the VA pushing these benefits out the door, and he's clearly the right man for the position. And then later today, I will also file cloture on Anthony Johnstone, an outstanding nominee to serve as lifetime appointment for the Circuit Court Judge for the Ninth Circuit. I want to thank Senator Tester for championing this strong nominee, and the Senate will take it up later this week. And finally, and importantly, in a few moments, I will also take the first procedural steps, or a few moments ago, I took the first procedural step for the Senate to take up a monumental resolution regarding the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment. The Senate will vote to take up this historic ER measure on Thursday. It's been exactly 100 years since the first Equal Rights Amendment was proposed here in Congress. Despite the progress America has made in the advancement of women's rights, we have yet to take one fundamental step, ratification of the ERA, to guarantee gender equality under the Constitution. The Senate has a chance this week to bring our country one step closer to equal justice under the law by passing this bipartisan ERA resolution. 3/4 of the states have already ratified the ERA, just not in the requisite time set decades ago. The resolution would remove the arbitrary deadline and formally recognize that 38 states, the number required under the Constitution, have ratified the ERA. Anyone who thinks the ERA isn't necessary at a time like this is not paying attention to the terrible things happening in this country. In the past year alone, the Supreme Court has eliminated the protections of Roe v. Wade. Our courts have targeted drugs like mifepristone. And we've seen over a dozen hard-right states enact near total bans on abortions. We need the ERA more than ever before. I want my daughters and granddaughter to live in a country where they never have to worry about being discriminated against simply because of their gender. And while sadly that's not the case today, we have a great opportunity to make significant progress on ERA ratification this week so we can enshrine the rights of generations of women to come. I want to thank Senator Cardin, who has spearheaded this, along with Senator Murkowski. It's bipartisan. Thank them for championing this ERA resolution, and I look forward to advance its voting this Thursday. And finally, in a few minutes, my colleague from Massachusetts will take the floor to ask unanimous consent that some of our brave military leaders get the promotions they deserve. It is absolutely outrageous that the senator from Alabama is playing with the security of America, playing with the lives of these military leaders whose lives are being disrupted by his harsh action. He believes strongly that women in the military shouldn't have the right to abortion. Almost all Americans disagree with him. But no matter how strongly he feels, to hold up the promotion of military leaders, most of whom have dedicated decades of their lives to protecting our country, and now leaving those positions vacant, risking our security, is one of the most abominable and outrageous things I have seen ever done in this chamber, witnessed by the fact that no one has ever had the temerity, the gall, to do this before. And so I salute the senator from Massachusetts for bringing these names up. Everyone in this chamber should exalt them. Members of this chamber from the other side should go plead with the senator from Alabama to stop this headstrong, nasty, and unneeded action. And I again thank our senator from Massachusetts, who is chair of the subcommittee that is relevant, for bringing this issue to the floor and showing America what the senator from Alabama is exactly doing. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator